we on? Let's go. Welcome to another episode of the OoruLabs podcast from Bengaluru. Ever complain how bad our cities are, how bad your commute is? You'll get to hear from people who are working to solve these problems in their own way. This is your weekly soapbox for urban sustainability. I'm Satya Sankaran. 18 million people turn 18 each year in India, and we have over 100 million people surplus in agriculture. Unless we create 20 million jobs each year, India's dream of a demographic dividend could easily turn into a nightmare. This is the title of the 20 million jobs project that our guest today, Sridhar Krishna, has been driving. He is a senior scholar at the Takshashila Institution and leads the 20 million jobs project. He graduated from BITS Pilani and has an MBA from SP Jain, Mumbai. He works with startups, helping them scale, and with a civil society organization on judicial reform. Till recently, he was the managing director at Accenture, where he worked on analytics and AI. Welcome to the show, Sridhar.
Oh, thanks, Satya. Thanks for having me.
These headlines are really startling. What is the role, however, you see for cities in fixing this jobs gap?
Satya, I think there is this romantic ideal that people have that we could all live in these beautiful villages and, go back to our roots. If the air is clean and nice and everything, and everybody could live there. And lots of people have talked about maybe there are lots of people migrating from the villages into the cities. Instead, it should be the other way. People should go to the villages and live there. But the reality is that no country in history has so far reached $8,000 per annum per capita without at least 65-70% of the population living in cities. So I think from that perspective, it looks like we need cities in order to create jobs and in order for us to have a better standard of living. So that's one. Number two, if you look at agriculture, there's only so much that you can do with agriculture when it comes to growth, right? So you can improve the yield per hectare, you can maybe double it, you can do whatever. But you can't increase. It's very hard to increase the area under agriculture. I think there's a limitation of water. All that is a huge constraint. So there are huge natural constraints in terms of how much agriculture can grow by. You can maybe increase, you can improve yield by twice. 2 times, 3 times, whatever. But it's not going to go to the point where we need to be. Even today, if you look at India's GDP and the proportion of GDP that comes from out of agriculture, with over 55% of the people involved in it, only about 16% or so is from agriculture. So therefore, we do need people to move to cities and do urban jobs in order for India to grow.
So that also means there is going to be a concentration of labor, there's going to be more migration, there's going to be more people coming in, and the consequential catch up that infrastructure provisioning has to do in cities is that much more astronomical. We've seen this in cities like Bengaluru, where more migration has also meant more pressure on city infrastructure, but that has the positive impact of creating more jobs and creating more economic growth, right? So
Yeah.
what has migration actually done, and how do you balance this thing that we need to go back to the villages thing, which is not feasible after a
Yeah.
little while, right? So
Yeah.
how do we address this problem of negative blowback on saying no, migration is not good because it's leading to some other externalities?
Yeah, I think migration leads to many externalities which are not pleasant for people, right? In terms of, where do people come and live? If somebody lands up, if tens of thousands of people land up from the villages into our cities, where can they live? They don't have a job yet. While they're struggling to get their feet on the ground, where do they go and stay? They try staying with their relatives or friends for a few days, but eventually they're out on the streets, and then you're going to so if these people don't have enough money of their own, it's going to be difficult for them to rent accommodation. They'll just go in and squat where they can. So there is that. And if these people don't end up sending their children to school, etc., and all those things lead to other types of problems as well. But this is a reality. We've got to figure out ways of dealing with it. People are going to come from villages into our cities looking for jobs. Our cities cannot function if people were not to come from other places. The kind of services that we are all used to are all available to us because these people come from the villages and migrate into our cities to work for us, either in our factories or in our homes or in our municipality and everywhere. And we need people to migrate into our cities to work. So we need to make it possible. So I think The problem also is the skewed development which happens where people end up going. Everybody in Karnataka, most of the revenue comes from Bangalore, right? Most of our GDP is sort of generated from out of Bangalore, and that's true of many states, right? Very few cities in each. So I think we need more states, more cities in each of the state to be doing well. We need to have, and that happens. And why do people come to Bangalore? Because Bangalore's got the infrastructure. However much we might curse the infrastructure in Bangalore, the fact is it has got better infrastructure than the other cities. I mean, in terms of reliable power, in terms of um, a transport network, in terms of industrial estates or places where jobs people come, and then it just concentrates in one place, and then so people work there. So I think if we make our other cities better and invest in them effectively, I think you can have like Hubli and other places also taking some of the migrants, and like you can have a slightly better quality of life in our existing cities. So our second tier, third tier cities need to grow. We need I mean, in my opinion, I think our plus population should be spread between 1,000 cities, each of about 1 million people each. I mean, that's what I would like. I think if we create more cities, we would have more jobs. Just the act of creating the cities will lead to better jobs. Nitin Pai and Pranay and Anupam, etc., had from Takshashila had talked a little while ago about how it would be a great idea if our governments were to go and create new cities by moving a capital. Like, let's get capital of Bangalore. Let's make Karnataka's capital not Bangalore. Move it to some other place. Create a new city, then you'll have enough people going there, and therefore that city can get created. So I think things like that will have to be done for us to make it more sustainable. Maybe more cities, smaller populations.
Yeah, we do have a winter session in the northern part of Karnataka once in a while, but I
Yeah.
think I get what you're saying. Now, but the cities are also increasingly, the inner cities are becoming service oriented and less manufacturing.
Hmm.
That's slowly getting pushed to the outskirts and the sprawl. And structurally, I don't think we are defining our cities right also.
Hmm.
And nevertheless, how do you see the sectoral allocation? Because each 20 million jobs annually, it's such a humongous task, right? Where are we on that? What kind of numbers are we adding now?
Yeah.
And where do we start this increase? I know it is growing, India is growing, we are
Sure.
heading there.
Yeah.
But is it fast enough, and what can speed this up? And is there any overheating that can happen if you're growing too fast?
So I mean, the gap is huge. Yeah? So, for instance, instead of 20 million jobs that we require, we are probably creating anywhere between 2 to 4 million jobs a year, right? So, I mean, four is like a very, very optimistic number, and there are people who believe that it's even less than 1 million. The problem has been that despite India's considerable growth over the last 2, 3 decades, that growth has been a largely jobless one. Our employment elasticity has been, which was in the 70s at something like zero point 0.9, has come down to 0.087. So, which means that even when we were growing at 2-3% in the 70s, we were increasing the number of jobs by about almost 2%. The number of people in jobs were increasing by about 2%. While today, even though we are growing at 7-8% over the last, I mean, except there might have been a dip in the last few couple of years, but otherwise we've been growing at about between 6 and 8%. But our job growth has been less than a percentage, and that's because of like good things happening also. Like our productivity has gone up, labor productivity has gone up. We've brought in automation. We've become more competitive. Our industries have become more competitive. There's been growth, but it has been a largely jobless one. I think like that's the downside of it. But without growth, you can't have jobs. You can't even. But let's look at it. I'm not against growth, because if you didn't have growth, you couldn't have Manrega. You won't have the resources for all those other services that today the government is able to do. Those things would not have been possible at all. I mean, we would have just been creating jobs when nobody would be producing anything. But today we are producing a lot, but we don't have jobs. So I think it's a better place to be, but we still need to get those jobs too.
But it's a lot of service sector job. I was just reading today, like I was mentioning before we started recording, is that I guess Anupam or someone wrote that there's been more qualified people doing
Gig
gig
work, yeah,
work, right? So that's one part. So where are these jobs going to come from? Which sector is it going to be? We've predominantly been service sector driven for the past whatever years.
yeah,
Manufacturing is something you have alluded to.
yeah.
That doesn't is it any better now? Do you think we can catch up on that?
Yeah, I think like the whole world. It was a very interesting article in the Economist last month called "The Manufacturing Delusion," and they talked
Hmm.
about how even developed countries around the world are wondering, are wanting, are dreaming of this utopian environment where they could go back to manufacturing. America is investing $1 trillion, saying that like we want to become the manufacturing capital of the world again. The EU, which is like known for not allowing its member states to provide great incentives, financial incentives for one thing or the other, have agreed that it's all right to do so for manufacturing. Right? They're saying you can provide some incentives. They're amending their rules in order to make that happen. The Economist argues that manufacturing, the nature of manufacturing has changed. The idea that like you will get those very nice middle level jobs in manufacturing in the past, which you had in the past, will are no longer there. Manufacturing today is largely many low end jobs and a few high end ones, and so it's not really the most desirable place for us to for the West to go. But I have a slightly different take on what it is for India. I do believe that manufacturing can help India. India needs lots of jobs. Our labor force participation rate is extremely low. We have very few women in our workforce. I think like large scale manufacture can attract and provide opportunities for many of these people. Even if it is low end jobs, that's okay. It's better than not having jobs. So I think like, from that
Hmm.
perspective, I think even manufacturing is good. But I think our PLI scheme, etc., which is directed towards trying to encourage manufacturing, has its limitations. I think we're trying to like, very hard to pick some winners, etc. It might be better off doing some standard things which will actually improve, make India a better place to work out of, set up business, make it easy, the licenses. We seem to be returning a bit to the license Raj with some of the policies which we seem to be coming up with because we're trying to control it. We're doing it because we think we're doing it in the name of national security. We think we're doing it in order to, the intentions are not bad, right? So I think we're doing it because we think we can help increase manufacturing jobs in India, but we might end up affecting those, right? So I think that's one view. But there are a few industries where I think have even this PLI scheme can help. For instance, we have some serious competitive advantage in bulk drug manufacture, etc. So I think in pharmaceuticals and some of those areas, I think the PLI scheme might actually give us good benefits. So understanding that and going into that a little bit and making sure that we support the right industries. I might be contradicting myself by saying that we shouldn't be picking winners. But if you don't have in the short run, you might have to pick some winners, right? And so you have to
Yeah.
be sensible about it and use your resources within a few places and try to do that, while use the rest of your resources to actually improve the industrial environment and the laws and everything else, and make it easy for people to start a business, easy for them to fail and shut down a business, and so on. I think those things are important. We made some progress in terms of our labor law reforms in other areas, but more to be done. Yeah.
We'll come back to the ease of doing because closing is harder than starting, and starting itself is quite hard. And I do agree that some kind of rolling protectionism is required in some areas. Most countries have used that, but that's a
Mhm.
conversation for a different day. One of the things that I wanted to talk about was while there is a lot of jobs that are currently available in the cities, there is this mismatch between skills and the jobs that are available. I hire, so I can see it. Many of us hire. We can notice that the schools, while we're churning out lots more people, there's such a wide range of quality coming out of
Yeah.
schools. We're trying to teach people more, teach kids more, and end up teaching them actually less. There's so many of these are happening, and we just alluded to this whole report of overqualified people seeking
Big
gig
jobs. Yeah.
jobs and things
Yeah.
like that. This whole, how do we tackle this mismatch? Because there are so many people we say are available. There are company I have listed jobs. There are so many people who have listed jobs, and yet we are not able to close them
Yeah.
appropriately.
Yeah.
What is this? How do we
Yeah,
unpack this?
and what you're saying is absolutely true because I think even the ILO came up with a report and said that in this decade there will be like some 29 million jobs which will go unfilled because we don't have the skills to fill them. Right? In a country which is
Hmm.
desperately seeking jobs, we have this very sad situation of not being able to fill jobs which are out in the market. So there is this huge problem of a skills mismatch, right? I think that's a big gap. And I think
Mm.
there is this problem. So I like this little example that I have of um, this my friend Gurmeet Singh, right? Who's a lathe operator in Ludhiana, and he realized that he was earning only 10-15,000 rupees a month. And somebody told him that you should operate CNC machines, you'll probably earn more money. Now he finds out that in order to learn how to use a CNC machine, you have to pay 50,000 rupees to a training institute to get trained. Now he's earning 10-15,000 rupees. He obviously doesn't have 50,000 rupees to spare. He also knows it'll take 2-3 months, which means he'll need to spend almost a lakh of rupees in order to take, say, imagine 3 months pay, be, leave
Mm.
without pay for 45,000 rupees plus this 50,000 rupees. So he's talking about 95,000 rupees. So he has to take a loan of almost a lakh of rupees in order to go and do this. And if he goes and does that and doesn't get a job at the end of it, then what happens? He's in a worse position, right? He doesn't have a job now. He's in debt for a lakh of rupees. So he can't do anything. Instead, so I have this idea. There is this concept called career impact bonds. Yeah, it's been around for a while,
Mhm.
but it's not grown quite significantly. But I think today the time is right for it to succeed. And I'll explain to you why. Imagine a situation where Gurmeet, instead of borrowing money from some moneylender and trying to do this course and finding it almost impossible to repay this loan. Imagine a situation where the training institute gives him a loan of 95,000 rupees, takes 50,000 rupees for itself to pay the fees, and 45,000 rupees it gives him so that he can live during this period. And Gurmeet has to repay this loan only if he gets a job at the end of this training. And he has to
Mm.
repay the loan only if he gets a job which pays him more than, let's say, 25,000 rupees a month. And then he pays a percentage of that income. If he earns 25, let's say he pays 5. If he earns 30, he might pay 7, and so on, right? So you can have that kind of a system where the person who's training you has an incentive to help you to go out and get a good job and helps you and is incentivized to help you earn more money. But then the training institute will have some liquidity problem. They can't obviously finance this for a large number of people. They'll run out of money. So they'll have to pool these loans. Imagine all these at-risk loans, which I call them. They get pooled, and then a special purpose vehicle is created, and you structure these securitize them, structure them into bonds,
Mm.
different tranches. The senior tranche will be a AAA rated one, where people like you and I will go and sort of invest as a financial investor. Then you could have like somebody who's got a little more risk appetite, probably subscribes to the middle tranches. Then you have somebody who's the government or CSR funds of various organizations, and even this training institute, for instance, subscribing to the equity tranche. So now what happens is you have the entire system which is incentive has the same incentive. Let's get Gurmeet a job. Let's teach him the right skills. If
Mm.
Gurmeet does not have the aptitude to become a CNC operator, you will tell him upfront and not take his money. Right? You will not ask him to go and get trained in something in which you believe that he doesn't have the aptitude to do. So I think this kind of thing will make a
Mm.
huge difference. So if you create these and create bonds, then the financial markets will ensure that the money will flow towards training programs and institutes which provide job oriented training and not and away from people who are just coming in there to scam desperate job seekers, right? So I think that would be something that we could work on. Earlier it didn't work very well because how do you ensure that somebody who goes out into the market after the training, he's gone out, he goes into another city, wherever, goes and has a job. How do you ensure that that person repays the loan? Today, the sector things have become much more. I think everybody's got a bank account. This whole jam, Jandan, Aadhaar, mobile. With that, I think you can keep track of people more easily. You can keep track of their incomes. You can have like a legal framework which allows for this to work. And if we find the right legal framework and contracts in order to make this system work, I think it can be fantastic. Recently, Google has announced $100 million fund to train people in Google certifications, etc. And they say that you don't have to pay for the certification. You pay only if you earn more than $40,000. And this is for people in the US, and it's along with this company called Social Finance. And they've set up this, right? So
Mm.
this is something that's what I'm talking about is not something that doesn't exist. It exists, and it can be a very good solution for us to train large numbers of people and bridge this gap.
So I guess it needs to come out of finishing schools or
Yeah,
vocational finishing schools of some
yeah,
such kind, rather than the traditional college giving you basic
absolutely.
education, or I don't know if the engineering colleges can even morph into that, because they seem to be chasing a lot of courses which seems to be in demand. I've seen at least three different variations of AI and machine
Hmm.
learning courses just to fill
Yeah.
the seats, and they are promising higher and higher footfalls, not translating into
Hmm.
jobs really. And the incentives are not
Yeah.
in line. They're teaching things, yeah, but then when these guys come out and the industries are trying to hire, there is definitely a
Absolutely.
gap. I mean, it's not going to be a perfect
Yeah. And
match,
I
right?
think, like, this is to be looked at as a more finishing school kind of system, because I think that's what will work, right? So you need to have this finishing school kind of system, because
Hmm.
people, what you graduate from college today knowing is not going to be adequate to keep you employed over the next 30, 40 years that one needs to remain employed. So all of us have to acquire new
Hmm.
skills. I started off, I spent my first decade in manufacturing. I spent my second decade doing IT and outsourcing. I spent my third decade doing AI and analytics. And now I'm doing other stuff. So I think that's and we had the resources to upskill ourselves. A large majority of Indians don't. And I think something like this will help make that a reality.
Fair enough. So, but then the in as we grow and as our GDP grows and our per capita income grows, we are going to get less and less competitive in the manufacturing
Yeah.
space and in a lot of spaces, right? That's a bigger challenge we are quickly encountering. Like the developed world is trying to go back to manufacturing, but they're
Yeah.
going to be outpriced. And if you're relying on comparative advantages, there are issues of these inter globalization problems that we
Yeah.
are facing now, which is national security, conflict, closing down of borders,
Yeah.
lots of these things. How do we juggle these and yet be able to get to 20 million? Because that's
I
10
think,
times more.
everybody seems to be more confident than you and I, Satya, in this, because I was I read a beautiful, I saw a lovely chart by this visual capitalist yesterday or day before, which talked about, like, the global GDP in 2050. And it today, if it talked about how the US will be at about 27 trillion, China will be number one at about 44 trillion, and India will be at 22 trillion, right? India will be number three at 22 trillion, and that's like a significant number, because when you look at that we're talking about India having a per capita income of about 14, $15,000, and that's not going to happen
Mhm.
without a larger labor force participation or all those things, and that is why they believe that India will get there, because they're saying that we have a lot of young people, and they say that a lot more people will get into these jobs, and therefore it'll happen, because we will find a way, right? I mean, like, we'll all struggle, we will muddle, but we will. When you have so many young people, we have no choice. This issue is going to be so big that elections will be won and lost on this subject of jobs. Therefore, people will solve, right? I think that's, I'm an optimist from that perspective. And I think services are also changing. We talked about whether manufacturing or service, and I want to just briefly get to that.
Mm.
If you look at global trade, I mean, therefore, if you look at GDP globally, I think about, out of the 105 trillion or so, which is the global GDP, about 63, 64% is from services. But if you
Mm.
look at global trade, only 21% is services. Most of the global
Mm.
trade is in manufactured and agricultural goods. They're not in services. So if India were to grow, where is it going to grow? Is it, I mean, if you want to if you have to have an export oriented economy, initially we may look at, like, manufacturing, but it's also interesting to see that services is growing much faster than manufacturing and agriculture, even in trade. The technology is making huge changes. What was initially possible, it was difficult to trade in certain types of services because you needed to have people also move there to deliver those services, which obviously, due to people are not very keen on having someone come over and do that job, right? So they don't want people to migrate to their countries. So they are always a little hesitant. But I think technology will make it possible for many services to be delivered remote: education, healthcare, environmental services. These are services which have hitherto been only done in person. But those things can change and can be done, will soon start being done much more remote. And therefore, you might see a surge in services trade, which means many of those jobs could also be created in services.
That also has the danger of technology is also changing. There is AI, there's going to be job losses. The elasticity is only going to get, well, we may balance it out because we are growing right now. But where do you see those conversations going with AI and job loss? And because products you have to make the products. There is also automation there that's taking some things away. It's not going to be as elastic as earlier for sure because there's automation. The same automation is creeping into software. Is that going to, because we're in the
Yeah, I
middle of
think.
everything now. On one
Yeah.
side, this is going that way, and
I know what you mean, and I think I've been reading about this quite a bit, and I've also been working at Takshashila along with a bunch of colleagues on this subject of AI governance and what needs to be done in that space, etc. And job loss is it is a huge shift, right? So when you look at each industrial
Hmm.
revolution has led to a loss of traditional jobs and led to a creation of new set of jobs, right? And I think the biggest problem has been the skills mismatch. And then, like, one generation, it takes a generation really for that to happen. I think one good thing which I've noticed is that I was reading the World Trade Organization's report on jobs of the future. In the Jobs of the
Hmm.
Future report is a biennial report. They didn't produce one in 22, they produced one in 23. The one in 20 indicated that today, of all jobs that are being done, 33% is being done by uh, machines and 67 by man. Then they said that by 2022 or 2025, 50% of all jobs will be done by the machine and only 50% will be done by human beings, right? But when come 2023 and they looked at the same data and they found that only 34% is being done by machine. 33 has become 34. And despite all the hype, there's still a small percentage increase in the number of jobs which have actually gone to machines. And humans are still doing 66%. So I think it is going to happen, but I think the pace of AI
Hmm.
adoption may not be as high as as much as the hype is, right? So the pace of AI
Hmm.
adoption will probably give us time. I'm hoping will give us time to upskill ourselves and make ourselves ready for jobs of the future. So that's why that optimist in me speaking. The other thing is we're also imagining that, like, everybody's talking about how I read some Accenture report. I mean, I used to work with Accenture in the past. I read an interesting Accenture report which said that 65% of all the jobs that we do are language oriented jobs and 40%
Hmm.
improvement there. I mean, they said, like, and 60% of that can be sort of done by machine. And that means, like, there'll be a 40% increase in sort of productivity, which means that if you were to produce the same number of goods or same things across the board, we'll probably need like 40% less people in order to do this. That's basically assuming that our global GDP is going to remain at this current level. And, like, and for producing this output, you need 40% less people. The reality is, we should probably be able to do way more things than what was possible before. There will be a lot more that we
Hmm.
do in terms of, like, the arts and culture and person to person interaction and many things which maybe humans may do better. We might, spend a lot more on our leisure and various other activities, etc. So the share of the economy from different sectors may change quite significantly. So I think these are things that will happen. In the long run, it might take a generation. And I think there will be a generation which will suffer with this kind of transition that and the thing that's happening, and what kind of social safety nets, etc., that we can provide will determine whether we go into whether we have some kind of revolution or those kind of problems, or whether we transition smoothly into a new type of working and a new type of jobs. So there is the role of government and
Yep.
society in ensuring a smooth transition. And I believe these career impact bonds can provide a bit of a bridge between those things. So if you can help people access money to go and train themselves and upskill themselves, then this way if somebody wants to learn something, it helps them to know what to learn. It helps them to know where to learn it from. And then it also tells them that if I don't learn it properly, they don't have to, I don't have to repay the loan. So I think if it takes that fear off, then it'll be like everybody's a rich kid, right? I mean, like, as you can go and learn what you want, you have exposure to a lot of data, your father's friends and mother's friends, they and that helps you to know what to study and where to study from. This career impact bonds can help in doing something similar for everybody.
What kind of organization should be looking at career impact bonds? You did mention vocational institutes, private vocational institutes. What kind of a backing is required for them? How do they begin this journey of a career
Yeah, I think
impact
they
bond?
have
Have
to
you
like
thought
work
through
with a
that?
bank, right? So basically, I think you should look at working with
Hmm.
some banks and like financial institutions which do securitization and create bonds. Today you have bonds which are created for like mortgage bonds, right? You have like so you have mortgage bonds, you have
Hmm.
home loans. People take those home loans, pool them together, and then they create bonds out of it. So go work with all those investment banks and like tie up with your banks and the banks also are looking at interesting asset classes. Honestly, I think that in the long run,
Hmm.
education is a fantastic asset class. I think if like it's done in such a way that everybody gets if you're aligning the incentives, why is there such a large amount of unpaid student debt in the US? It's because incentives are not aligned. There's just like cost of providing education is increased.
Hmm.
People get loans and then they don't and they have to repay those loans whether they get big jobs or not. Instead, if these are for smaller loans, these are given for people to upskill themselves, and it's going to be easier today to track people than it was in the past. So I think it'll be an interesting asset class which provides interesting good returns over time. The initial few years will have to be financed by philanthropists and CSR funds and the government, but eventually, within like say 2, 3, 4 years, I believe that this kind of financing can ensure money goes towards programs that do well and that money will get repaid. And therefore, it can be a good investment.
This could be a good idea for
Yeah,
edtech startups now. Maybe
yeah,
it's a good differentiator for them to start saying, enough with the
yeah.
online, let's get the jobs. The biggest thing is the space race now, right? Building rockets and many other technologies, which is it. I also have
Ah,
this fascination for green
yes,
jobs. I've heard a lot about
yeah,
it. I don't know if that is even on the what does that
that
look like? What does that environment look like? Is there
absolutely.
jobs to
I
be
think
created
like,
there?
you look at India, we made commitments of being net zero by 2070, right? We've also made some specific guidelines around how much we will cut our emissions by like some 2050 or so, right? We've got some milestones to cross. If India is going to create these number of jobs that I'm asking for, and I believe we need, if we create it in the same sectors in which we are currently working, if we create it using the same technology which we are currently using, obviously it will be a disaster, environmental disaster. Amitabh Kant made a mention at a CII event that I attended last year that India will be the first country which will have to do all this growth while being green, right? So you have to grow while being green, and that's going to be very critical for India. What does that mean? It could translate to India it's going to have a huge demand for green technology in order to. So while other countries are talking about spending $4 trillion globally, that's the amount of money that needs to be invested per annum for the green transition. So there's a huge amount of money to be spent, right? So that could
Hmm.
lead to a big demand for things in India. But India is slightly different. We're not talking about a green transition. We're talking about growth with green, right? Which means that we need to create new capacities which will
Hmm.
be green and which will not be and which will be environmentally friendly, etc. So because of this huge demand that will be there in India, India could become a big leader in green tech. At least the factor conditions are right for it to do so. Now it has to get the right skills, it has to right partners. You know, work with Israel, you can work with many other countries which have some good technology, work with them, create partnerships, and use the large number of people that we've got and make it happen. So I think green technology is a huge opportunity for India. I think manufacturing can create some jobs in the short run. I think like services is seeing a structural shift in terms of how services are delivered. That provides us an opportunity. So I think all this is important.
So here's the thing. Today we are a nation of a lot of small entrepreneurs. I am one myself, but they are not going to create the kind of jobs alone. And there are going to have to be larger manufacturing companies. Even the small guys don't even have enough big companies to exit out to.
Yeah.
So how do we achieve that kind of scale for the large manufacturers, big scale companies which can achieve things at large? Is that going to happen anytime soon, you think?
I agree with you that, it's very nice to see lots of entrepreneurs, etc., amongst our friend circle and people doing it. And we do need a mix of both small, medium size and small and large organization. But the large jobs, the kind of pace at which we need jobs created, I think we need large companies to come in. We need large scale manufacture to happen. I'm not very confident that that can happen overnight. We might see it in a few sectors, but I don't see that happening so easily. However, today in Mint, read a very interesting article about this company called Zetwork. They are like an online marketplace for small to medium sized manufacturing firms, and they have overall turnover of about 11,000 crores. They've become a unicorn, but they produce only about 5-6% of the products of that manufacturing is done by them. A large number is done by, they've identified companies which are small, which are doing different things, and they're able to provide a sort of marketplace for them. Just like an Oyo just like Oyo connected small hotels, etc., with the user, with the customer. This company is doing that. So I think some things like this, I think intelligent use of technology can sort of help in providing a scale when scale doesn't exist. I mean, like it's sort of created artificially by combining all these enterprises together. Who would have thought that many of these small hotels would have just sort of died? They were almost on the verge of death when suddenly OYO, etc., came, Bloom Rooms and all that. They came and they provided them with a second life. So I think something like that might help. But for the kind of jobs that we do need large manufacturing. And we also have to look at the services sector very seriously. There are changes happening, and we need to be ready to take advantage of those changes in services. India should have the ambition to become for services what China became for manufacturing. And I think like that's something that we can seriously work towards, right? If we can't create those large manufacturing jobs, let's at least become the services capital of the world, right? So I think that's what you have to
Makes
do.
sense. But that also brings into question the role of the government in all of these things, right? Of course, the industry will have to do what it needs to do. Ease of business is one that I can think of. What else can you think of? Where are we standing on that?
I think a good legal framework for people to be able to work, right? A legal system which is reliable, where I mean both of us sort of met at Daksh, and we talked about how there are all these cases which are pending forever and ever. I think ways by which, if you have a better legal system, I think more people, a more reliable and a more efficient legal system, I think people will be willing to go out and take chances and run business. So I think
In
that's
fact,
important.
I just spoke with Surya about that issue on the trust thing,
Yeah.
which is where we had this. I think you and I had a conversation long ago as well. But
Hmm.
the low trust economy is also putting a lot of entrepreneurs at risk. But
Yeah.
nevertheless, continue. I
So I
think
think that's one.
he has mentioned something around that in
Yeah.
the recent podcast that was released today. I
Correct.
mean, this week, last weekend.
Yeah, and I
But
think like there's another one which I think which I've been reading about with great interest is the fact that these MSMEs don't get paid on time by a large number
hmm,
of, I mean, they have a huge credit crisis. They have access to credit that they've got is only 15 to 20% of what they really need. The delays in payments by large public sector enterprises is making it difficult for these people to sustain themselves. I think some of these things the government can do to ensure that they pay on time. I heard the finance minister talk about asking private and companies to pay MSMEs on time. I think it is probably best done by leading with by example. And I think if the public sector and the government pays the MSMEs on time, then I think MSMEs will automatically get paid by the larger
in,
Indian private sectors also on time.
in fact, on that as well, the Udyam number or the Udyogadar number that used to
Yeah,
be there. If you have
yeah,
that and say you're an MSME, if you don't get paid within 30 days or something like
yeah,
that, you can charge an interest month on month interest of some 1.6% or whatever it
sure.
is. I'm not very clear, but I do have that. But it's one thing to have that and tell them.
Yeah,
I've had to use that once to tell them that, hey, you can't. You've been dragging your feet. But
yeah,
it's another thing to actually get it enforced. You can't go back into the
yeah.
same. legal system where there is a huge queue, right? And we
Yeah,
also talked about if this amount is small and it's just a month or two's recovery or 3 or 4 months recovery, it's just so small that the legal system prioritizes larger crimes over you,
correct.
and you end up becoming this casualty like the police guy who's sitting in the trying to file a case for a mobile phone when there is a murder case going on, right?
Yeah,
You get
absolutely.
priced out. The so if it all comes back to the judicial, so I kind
Yeah,
of agree
I
with
think
you,
so.
but
That
ease
is
of
one
business
thing.
also, right?
Yeah, that's true. I think it affects ease of doing business, absolutely. And I think not having access to credit, not having delays in payments, having a legal system that works that you can rely on. Then it's about, we keep talking about power. We talk about all our villages now have been collected by electricity. I think it's important to have power that is reliable, right? I think like it's important, even if you say that I will give you good quality power for 8 hours a day. The rest of the time you run by generator, but these 8 hours you will get like good solid power, which doesn't fluctuate, which protects your equipment and everything. I think those kind of things will make a difference. I think farmers will also like it. So will industry. I think having quality power which is reliable, I think that's very important. And and I think basically just aligning incentives to make sure that you grow and I think they're making changes with respect to the labor laws, etc., which will make it easier to for companies to grow. The old incentives to remain small will sort of slowly go away. And we need to ensure that, I mean, the government should believe that it can be fallible, right? And therefore understand that it can't know everything and therefore should not try to, control the economy too much. I mean, you should sort of free it up, allow the market to play, just be around to ensure that the rules of the game are being followed. I think also create a system. I think understand that upskilling is very important. I think the
Hmm.
government spends a lot of money in the Skill Development Corporation, etc. I met some interesting people. They're doing very interesting things. I met the Karnataka Skill Development Corporation people. I had a conversation with them about what they are doing. They're training nurses and sending them to the Middle East, etc. But I think instead of doing that, what they should do
Hmm.
really is to be creating this legal framework where these career impact bonds can work. Maybe they deploy their funds as equity investments in these career impact bonds. So that way they are monitoring the system, be playing in the system to make sure that, and they can test the system. They can figure out if the money that they're investing is generating jobs. They can actually quantify the output. I think those are things that can work. I think that's what the government should be doing. It shouldn't be actually training people to go out and work as nurses in the Middle East, right? I think it's laudable that they're trying to do what they can do, but really the value would be more in if they were to play a supervisory role, a structural role, building institutions which allow for these kind of things to happen rather than running them themselves. That's
I
what
think
I
it's
would say.
important to rename that from skill development to maybe skill matching or something else that
Yeah,
is more appropriate, because you say skill development, you want to do the work and it gets kind of
correct. Yeah. I
aligned,
don't think the
misaligned.
government is best placed to understand what are the jobs that are required. It's very hard for somebody to do that because then it becomes, I don't think even if you or I were to sit down and say what are the skills of the future, it's going to be a tough job. And by the time we
Yeah.
may be right, but by the time we actually put out the report, it might be too late because by then, like those skills will no longer be required and something else will be required. So leave it to the market, find ways by which the market can respond to you quickly and give you a good feedback and use that better. That's what I would suggest.
Last but not the least, city governments.
Ha.
While they don't get the income tax for creating the jobs, I mean, they do get it through the finance commission, but not directly. What is the city government's role? Because we see infrastructure is a big challenge, right? Livability in cities, and these are things that people care about. You and I want to live in a nice city, walk around, do nice things, but that seems to skill development seems to take more, uh,
Yeah.
focus than actually creating infrastructure.
Yeah. I think like the problem is that cities are where jobs are created, but elections are not won here.
Hmm.
See, so therefore, the money that gets spent, that gets earned in the cities are rarely invested in the cities because it does not help them go out to win elections. So they win elections by going out of the cities into the districts and into other areas. And so I think that's a shame, right? So I think we need to give cities the ability to govern themselves directly and more effectively. Very few of our cities have a mayor, a proper elections to the BBMP. I don't know when they last happened. So those kind of issues, I think, are preventing our cities from achieving their true potential. I think more local governance, greater devolution of powers to our cities, share of revenue which is direct. Therefore, it's not like
Mm.
somebody's largesse which sort of comes out and uh, every now and then when somebody wants to do something, they might fix it, but otherwise, not enough resources being sent to places where revenue is generated, right? So I think so you got to have. I'm not saying that money is generated in Bangalore, so all the money should remain here and it shouldn't go anywhere else. We are one country. Money has to be shared. Those who make it will have to share it with those who don't. But it doesn't mean that you just milk it dry. You've got to make sure that you're at least providing enough. You nurture these cities in a way that it can provide more jobs and generate more revenue in the future. So you shouldn't kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. So yeah,
Well, they do indirectly look at real estate, hoping that more real estate means more jobs. It need not necessarily be true. So they do get the property tax out of that.
Hmm.
But directly, do you think there is it might be a long shot. Let them first get the devolution right. But at some point, creating jobs need to take precedence, and
Yeah,
most of the time it seems to be a government largest from the state that is driving, which is almost all of it.
yeah.
Minimal amount is coming out, but nevertheless. So last thoughts from you on 20 million from 2 million, or 18 million from 2 million,
Yeah, I
whatever it
think
is.
like we need to
How do
do
you do a
many things.
sectoral split?
Yeah. So I think like let's look at it. I mean, there are some so obviously while I talked about employment elasticity, there are some sectors within that which do have fairly high employment elasticity. Construction is one, right? So that's an area where there's a lot of progress which is happening. India is spending a lot of money on roads. So construction on infrastructure, investments in infrastructure, etc., will actually lead to more jobs because there is that. Otherwise, I think you should look at sectors which are like, having a high employment elasticity. You should make sure that your PLI schemes, etc., are more incentivized towards actual creation of jobs rather than just creation of some capacity and production, right? So you got to make sure that like incentives are provided which are linked to jobs. The third thing is about this whole idea of career impact bonds, making sure that people, I think everybody in schools and should be taught that you're going out there, you go to a university, you gain some education, but remember, you need to keep learning new skills every few years. Otherwise, you will not remain employable. Make sure that people learn how to learn well, right? I mean, like, right from some of us went to good schools, right? We had some good teachers who taught us how to study, who taught us how to learn. We had role models within our families who could teach us how to learn something. Somebody told you, okay, take down some notes, put this thing together, each thing that you remember, some important thing, highlight it on your page or whatever. Everybody finds some way by which they learn. I think we need to learn how to learn well, and if something like that is taught effectively at the school stage, I think that can make go a long way in people acquiring new skills as they go along. Technology change, all that is a reality. I think we have to welcome it, embrace the change, ride the wave of change, don't get swept under it, right? So, and the only way to do that is to acquire new skills. And a good way of doing that, I think that's something that I feel very strongly about. I think there's a big transition in the world to services, even in international trade. India should aim to become a big player there. The green transition provides interesting opportunities, interesting challenges, and opportunities for India. I think we need to look at them as not just challenges, but really use this opportunity to become the world leader in green. So if you become a big services player, you become a good green technology player, I think India can achieve that large 10,000 plus dollar per capita income in the next 20 odd year, 20, 30 years. But if we don't, and if we just try to like, make some small adjustments, and do things, we might lose a huge opportunity which seems to be ahead of us.
That's a wonderful thought, and that links back to what you said. Is the cities have to play a big role. The energy intensity cities is also going up, and it calls for some amount of deregulation and a lot of things like power as well. Education is a big thing. I hear you. I think I need to do a complete new episode on education itself, as to what is broken and how we fix it, and what are the different things. Not fixing it as in the government trying to fix something. On that wonderful note, thanks Sridhar for sparing the time to bring this forward and unpack this for us. Here's a call out to everybody else to like, subscribe, and share. See you all next week. Bye bye.
Thanks, Satya. Pleasure talking to you.